The new year is almost upon us, and no doubt we probably got an influx of new players looking to get a head start on your account. My name is Psyche, and I'm here to give you an updated reroll guide for the start of 2024. If you're wondering how to get the most out of your playtime, this is the video for you. I'm going to go over my personal list of units that you can prioritize and fish for, including how rerolling works, my ideal start, and a tier list of sorts of good units that are nice to have. Let's get right into it. So first, I'm going to go over what the concept of rerolling is. Since the game gives you 20 freebie pulls after completing Chapter 1, something you can do is to just keep creating new accounts until you get a few key meta units to jumpstart your account with. You technically don't have to reroll, but Nikke is regarded as one of the gacha games that's considered more advantageous if you start out with certain characters. All content can be cleared with any roster, it's just that having a strong head start will help you progress faster. I actually did this when I first began playing, and I was lucky enough to land a Scarlet and Leader. When you're signing up for an account, you don't actually have to use multiple emails. If you use a Gmail account, you can just add a plus sign after the first part of your email before the @ symbol, and then add a number after that. So this is something called salted emails, and it allows you to keep registering for new accounts under the same one. It only works for Gmail accounts though. This way, you can keep track of which accounts got which characters, and decide which one to commit to. By the way, this is common sense, but this video assumes you're watching this at any time, so any limited characters are out of the question. So in this guide, I'm going to list all the noteworthy units and also give a brief description on why they're worth it. A couple of things about the freebie pulls. You are guaranteed to get a random SSR on the first 10 pull. However, that free SSR cannot be a pilgrim. They're basically a faction of characters that are seen as more rare, as most of them are quite good. And this goes without saying, but this reroll guide is measured from a meta perspective. But if you got a personal favorite, then don't let me stop you from rerolling for them. A lot of the units are in the standard pool anyways. A word of warning is that rerolling today is going to be less advantageous than if you rerolled when the game was still at its launch. This is because more characters will dilute the standard pool, so there's less of a percentage chance to get the desired unit that you want. Of course, some of those new units are quite good, and I certainly wouldn't mind getting them, but some of them are also quite bad. So first, here is my ideal start. With the units we have now, and more coming on the way, I would say the best start with only having 2 required characters will be 1 strong DPS and then 1 strong supporter. The best case scenario, at least in my opinion, will be Red Hood as the DPS, then Leader for the support. If you're able to snag these 2 specifically, then you will be having one of the strongest starts to the account. Of course, since Red Hood is a pilgrim, you can't get her on the first multi, so you have to hope for RNG to take your side on this one. For my reroll tier lists, everyone I put on here will be good, but I'm going to be splitting it into 3 different tiers. 1 for DPS and support. You can honestly go for as many of them as you like, though I think just having 1 of either list is enough to get a head start. While there are units that are really good in the right circumstances, the main thing I'm looking for in these lists is general use. Since a new player is not expected to have a built-up roster yet, we want characters that are useful all the time. Now, Nikke has a fairly generous gacha rate at a 4%, and most units will enter the standard pool once their banner ends. You're most likely going to start filling out the roster as time goes on, and more characters will come with time. It's just that because of RNG, there will be a few units that just don't want to show up for some reason. Like for myself personally, it's Blanc. So there are certain DPS units that work right out of the box without needing any kind of investments or upgrades, and some that only become good when you heavily invest into their talents or overload gear, which you don't get until much later into the game. So obviously I'm going to prioritize the ones that work right from the beginning and does not fall off as you approach the late game. When rerolling, it's absolutely not the end of the world if you don't get Red Hood specifically, as other pilgrims like Dorothy, Scarlet, and Modernia will also carry you for a while. So for the DPS, Red Hood is ideal. She literally trivializes everything in the game and leaves everyone behind when it comes to dealing big numbers, and it's not even close. But the previously mentioned 3 are also not trailing too far behind. Red Hood has a piercing laser that damages everything in its path. While it doesn't have the widest AoE, the fact that it has an effective range at all is pretty insane. Even with no overload gear and very little investments into skills, she is one of the few DPSs that can be put on autopilot that you can just let do all the work for you. Low skill ceiling, high damage. Dorothy has cooldown reduction, which is one of the most valuable support buffs in the game, while also dealing numbers that support units really shouldn't be. Modernia and Scarlet, the OG overpowered pilgrims, they got AoE and insane damage potentials, and super easy to use too. Scarlet's numbers are pretty broken too, especially for a day 1 unit. She was considered the best when the game first launched, but now Red Hood has taken that throne. Even then, Scarlet's basically the pain train that never stops. Sure, some people, including myself, will say that she gets a lot better with late game gear, but even from the beginning, as long as you can run a healer to offset the self-health drain effect, you're gonna be set for a while. Maldornia's burst basically gives her this huge AoE circle that damages everything within its range. It is extremely good for campaign levels, which account for most of the early game. Another underrated reroll unit is Maxwell. She's more of a sub-DPS role, but that charge shot can be very helpful as it has piercing and can help clearing boss parts that are close together. If you're okay with settling with a decent but not too busted unit, you can also fish for Alice or Snow White, but these units tend to get better when you go into the late game, and only perform decently early on. Alice requires overload gear and needs you to play her manually to get the most out of it. And Snow White a bit more fringe in usage, but has in my opinion one of the most fun playstyles and the highest skill ceiling of any unit in the game. You're gonna need some tactical thinking to understand her nuke ability, but it's well worth it if you can master the way of Snow White. Now I'm gonna get some flack for this, but I don't think Haran is a good target to settle for. On online tier lists, especially for rerolls, you're gonna see her placed pretty high in the early game section. But I have said this in a previous video, eventually you will go from the early to late game, but never the other way around. So if a unit might not be the best when you first start out, they will become better later on, but if a unit falls off afterwards, well, they're gonna stay falling off from that time onwards. So what I'm trying to say here is, Haran is not a good reroll target for a DPS unit. Okay, so now we move on to the support reroll tier list. Again, ideal scenario, you get leader. To this day, she has not been power crept. You got the entire package here. Attack buffs, cover repair for defense, and cooldown reduction. Basically all the most useful buffs in one unit. Pretty much any team wants leader. She's literally gonna show up every time in team recommendations. Of course, there are other supports that are also pretty good, but some of them require more specific teammates to work. For individual supports, you can also aim for Dala, who also provides CDR, while providing a small attack up and a couple of other useful buffs too. Senti, who is an amazing shielder and works wonders in campaign content, and Rapunzel, who is one of the best healers in the game, plus being able to resurrect a downed unit. I'd be losing a lot of credibility if I didn't mention the bunnies or the schoolgirls. The only problem is that you must have both of the respective duels in order for them to work well. Blanc must be paired with Noor, Naga must be paired with Tia. Except for some extremely niche teams, it is expected that you have both. Each of the duels provide healing, damage buffs, and defensive skills. The bunnies are better for general use, while Tiga is more specialized for bosses. There's also the tier below for supports that are not as good or only shine in certain cases, like Noise's Taunt effect, and Volume, who also provides CDR, but has worse buffs than Leader by a pretty big margin. So let's sum it up. Ideally, I would get Red Hood and Leader as the ultimate start to your account, but you can obviously settle for one or two of the tiers below. Again, Nikke has one of the most generous gacha rates I've seen, but because the standard pool is so large, it may take a while to get your desired units. You might look at these charts and think that there aren't a lot of units on here, and that's really because if we were to get a head start with a few key units, we're really going for the best of the best. Nikke has a fairly varied roster, so you are going to be getting new ones pretty frequently. So even if the start of your account looks really limited, you will have access to all sorts of teams and playstyles as you continue playing. Way more than any other gacha game I've seen. This guide is being made before Christmas, but they did tease a new Scarlet event possibly for the new year. Since she's a pilgrim, I have little doubt that she's also going to be pretty good too. If that is the unit that they're releasing, of course. Anyways, obviously this guide doesn't account for any future units released in 2024, so if there are any notable ones, I might update it in the comments. Thank you for watching as always, enjoy the rest of the Christmas event, and happy holidays!